Welcome to week 3. Well, you may have heard about Star Wars, Clone Wars. Well, I'm going to talk about a different kind of war, the Reading War. The Reading War hit its peak around 1955 when Rudolf Flesch wrote a book entitled Why Johnny Can't Read. He held that the nation's only hope was to cling to a phonics approach to reading. The opposing side stood firmly that whole language, or reading the whole word, or as some would fondly call it, the look-say approach, was the only way to teach reading. Now, I grew up with the look-say method, and I recall my Dick and Jane readers. They probably looked very similar to what you're looking at right now. And we learned whole words, we memorized them, the teacher would say them, we would repeat them, we would write them, and we believed truly that we were reading. It wasn't until much later when I realized that I wasn't very equipped to address new words. There was no transference because each word was learned rather as an individual entity rather than word families. I was not encouraged at all to use phonemic awareness and understanding of the sound letter correspondence, or to employ phonics, which was the relationship of the letters to actually the written word, or the written word correlating to sound. Back in the day, we were not encouraged to do that. There was a lot of controversy over whether or not phonics really had a role in reading. So in 1967, Shaw wrote Learning to Read, The Great Debate, and he reiterated again the strength of phonics over the Dick and Jane type of reading. Now, Dr. Seuss tried to also do a look-say approach, but he wanted to demonstrate that he could make it very exciting and fun for children. So he took controlled vocabulary, and he leveled his readers based upon the controlled vocabulary, how many new words were introduced in his book, but using a rhyme and a rhythm scheme, he was able to make it very enjoyable for children. So that was a similar approach, but with a much more motivating, appealing storyline and just fun for kids. During the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I think a lot of hippies or some of the teachers who were a little bit turned off by the phonics approach and wanted to introduce good literature to children really held their ground and brought quality literature into the classroom and really put aside phonics for a while. So there were generations of children who really didn't work with phonics at all. Now, bring us a little bit closer to the present here. In 2006, the report of the National Reading Panel came out, and they strengthened the position of phonics and the explicit need, or the explicit instruction of phonics, not just incidental and not just putting it in the cracks like Jell-O, but really an explicit, overt approach to phonics instruction. Along with phonics, the panel also noted that any reading program must have the following components. And the first component being clearly stated goals. The second one, there should be strong curricular content. The content needed to be in these areas, these 5 areas: phonemic awareness, phonics, which would actually be the decoding, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. That any program that was worth its salt would have to have those 5 components in order to be a viable best practice program. The methods had to be sound, proven methods, methods that were research-based. Any approach must also have a strong assessment component, and finally, a mechanism for intervention for students who are struggling. And if the program did not have these components, it would not be deemed an effective reading approach. Well, there's no longer a reading war. The white flags have been raised, but there's disagreement still over how much reading time should be allotted to the explicit instruction of phonics. It's kind of like a phonics cocktail. Should 20% of the reading time be phonics? Should 50%? Should 80%? You still have some teachers who really are very insistent upon a literature approach with a component of phonics. You have others that are very phonics driven with a small literature approach. So that gives you a little bit of the history of that. And we do know that research does indicate that phonics for most students is a very strong approach. But as you'll read further, you'll see that some students really struggle, especially learning disabled students may have difficulty, again, with that executive function, being able to organize, being able to retrieve the sound system, having trouble with short-term memory. So phonics is not a catch-all. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's a component of any good reading program, and again, it must be explicit, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all students will benefit by 100% approach to phonics. We do want to do other types of things, maybe configuration of what a word looks like. We want to do word families. Onset and rhyme is very important. We do want to have sight words for students. We want to work at syllabication. We want to work at patterns such as consonant, vowel, consonant. And we want to use a variety of skills to address the reading needs of students.